and welcome to the Weekly Sceptic, episode 74. I'm Nick Dixon here with the man who took down the Premier League, Toby Young. And coming up, the horrendous Asylum Seeker attack that we're told is not about asylum seekers. MP Mike Friel steps down due to death threats and arson. Wonder who did that. And why are the Premier League spying on football fans? Plus loads more, and of course, peak woke. But Toby, first you want to say thank you to our base subscribers and say come to the live show Feb 12th, because we always have to say that.
Yes, so less than a week to go now before the Weekly Sceptic Live, which is downstairs at the Hippodrome. It's on Monday, February the 12th, and tickets are only £25. So if you want to have a drink with Nick and me afterwards in the Hippodrome's exclusive rooftop bar, you can do that for £75, which also includes price of the ticket to the show. So you come to the show, come have a drink with us afterwards. And tickets are selling fast, so if you want to come, go and check it out. If you want to buy a ticket, the easiest thing to do is to go to basedmedia.org and click on events. And then there's a link there to take you through to Eventbrite. You can buy a ticket. And we should also say thank you to those who've subscribed, become premium subscribers to Based. They'll be seeing a longer version of this show. For those of you that haven't yet subscribed, you'll be seeing the short version unless you subscribe, in which case you can see the longer version. And to subscribe, you need to go to basedmedia.org. That's BASED media.org, and you can become a premium subscriber for as little as £5 a month.
Yes, indeed. So come down on Feb 12th, Hippodrome in London, in Leicester Square. Some people get annoyed that you've just assumed it's London. You don't even say London. Like, how do you mean London? Yes, it's at Leicester Square at the Hippodrome. It'll be very good. It'll be hilarious, I'm sure, just like last time. So come along to that. And thank you to all the subscribers, as Toby says, basedmedia.org. And you'll still get a great version on the free one. I'm not going to shortchange it, but the paid one, you'll get loads of extra stuff. This week, we're going to go even bigger on the paid stuff. And I think that's pretty much that covered. So Toby, you went to this PopCon event, I believe. So in case anyone doesn't know, somehow they've missed PopCon. I mean, you have to be a political junkie for this, but people who listen to this will maybe aware of it. So there was this PopCon, which is another Liz Truss comeback. She seems to have come back many times as like the growth group and all this kind of growth coalition, whatever it was. Now she's back with PopCon. Farage was there, but it turns out so was Toby Young. Toby.
Yes, well, there were a couple of no-shows. So Simon Clarke, who used to be a very close Liz Truss ally, so PopCon is essentially a Liz Truss vehicle, not to kind of get her re-elected as leader of the party, but it's part of her kind of post-prime ministerial life after Downing Street. She's created this think tank / campaigning organisation. PopCon stands for Popular Conservatism, and it's led by Mark Littlewood, formerly the director of the Institute of Economic Affairs and a big Southampton fan. Last time I saw him, in fact, was on the train to a Southampton game when QPR were playing Southampton. So Simon Clarke wasn't there, and Ranil Jayawadena, another Tory MP, also a Liz Truss ally, expected, didn't show, but Nigel Farage expected and did show. And they had a pretty impressive roster of speakers. In addition to Liz Truss and Mark Littlewood, they had Jacob Rees-Mogg, they had Lee Anderson, former deputy chair of the Conservative Party and your fellow GB News host. And they had a new star. They unveiled a new star called Mari Fraser, who is the prospective parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party for the constituency of Epsom and Ewell, if that's how you pronounce it. And she was quite impressive. And the theme of the event was, how do we make red-blooded Conservative policies popular again? The implication was Rishi Sunak is failing to do that, partly because he's not conservative enough. And Liz Truss actually said in her speech that one of the problems, one of the shortcomings of successive Conservative prime ministers, and by implication Rishi Sunak, is that they've failed to confront left-wing extremists in the blob, and therefore the Overton window has just shifted further and further to the left. But the overall theme was that parliamentary democracy is being undermined by the growth of all these unaccountable bodies, not just the quangocracy, but also international unaccountable bodies like the WHO and the EU, etc. And I think a lot of it would resonate with us and with our listeners, and all power to them. And I think there was what I liked about it is that they shared our misgivings about the current direction of travel, about what's happening to our country. They were anti-woke. They want to limit immigration. They want to defend our borders. They want to do something to combat the denigration of Britain's history and heritage. And that they're all about lowering taxes and releasing entrepreneurs and taking the shackles off business, reducing red tape. So a lot of good conservative policies, which I think you and I and many of our listeners would agree with. So that was all encouraging. But unlike some of our listeners, they weren't too gloomy about the prospects of wresting back control. They're clearly quite optimistic. They think it can be done. Perhaps not in this parliament. Perhaps they won't be able to do anything for a while. But they weren't too gloomy about the prospect of a two-term Keir Starmer-led government. They still thought we could take back control and do something about all these forces that are undermining Britain. So that was quite encouraging. All told, I thought it was quite a positive morning.
Okay, well, a good account. But my skepticism regards the fact that are the policies they're talking about even that exciting anyway? I mean, it says the new PopCon group, this is in the Mail, will urge Rishi Sunak to go to the country later this year with policies that appeal to traditional Tory voters. I mean, imagine that. Amending the Equality Act, well, okay, yeah, that would be good. Reforms to the Human Rights Act, that would be good. Something on tax, okay, and not bother with the cigarette ban, but it's not really radical stuff, is it? Isn't it just kind of like fairly standard sort of watered down Thatcherism? I mean, is it that exciting? I mean, even if they do wrest back control, it's just Liz Truss stuff. I mean, is it that exciting?
Well, yeah, it was. Mari Fraser, she began with a quote from Margaret Thatcher, and I guess one of the criticisms of PopCon is, well, do they really have any new ideas, or is this just reheated Thatcherism? And there were some. I mean, I guess that their argument would be, look, Margaret Thatcher managed to boost the British economy, restore confidence to the British people, arrest the decline narrative by deregulating, by denuding the trade unions of power, by resetting and departing from the Butsker-like consensus. And the implication of what they were saying, the thrust of several of the speeches, was something like the same malaise is now afflicting Britain. Britain's become silted up with all this red tape. We're over-regulated. There's an unaccountable quangocracy, today's equivalent, I guess, of the trade unions, and we can, with a bit of the same reforming radical spirit of Margaret Thatcher, we can embark upon a reform program that will have the same positive effect on economic growth, on restoring animal spirits to the British economy, and so forth. So there was sort of, and I guess they did seem to be a slight pivot from straightforward free market capitalist neoliberalism, in that they definitely weren't pro-immigration, and that seems to be a pivot not only for Mark Littlewood but also for Liz Truss. Under Liz Truss, she was sort of seemingly quite sanguine about high levels of immigration. At one point, I think there was a mini scandal because she was clearly counting on ever-increasing levels of immigration to make her pro-growth economic agenda work. And that was one of the criticisms, I think, that Suella Braverman made of her government. But there was a lot of talk, certainly at the launch of PopCon, about limiting mass migration, about defending our borders, doing something about the small boats. So there does seem to have been a bit of a pivot. They weren't, socially conservative, and I guess differed from the NatCons in that respect. There was no references to our Christian heritage or anything like that, about defending the family, creating a kind of tax regime that was more hospitable to, families, nothing like that. So departed from NatCon in that respect, but certainly not quite as neoliberal as Liz Truss's kind of agenda was when she was PM. So there's been a slight pivot, but not a huge pivot. But I think probably the most impressive speech, not surprisingly, was that by Jacob Rees-Mogg. And he said things like, the age of Davos man is over. He talked about the populist revolt across Europe and the wider world more generally. He said voters have had enough and they're saying, up with this, I will not put. And he sort of positioned those populist revolts as a revolt against the erosion of national sovereignty in these countries. He talked about the farmers besieging Paris, said it was the first time Paris had been besieged since Bismarck. And one of the things they were complaining about is that the Macron government has to ask the EU for permission to create a slightly more favourable environment for French farmers. They no longer enjoy national sovereignty. And that's how he sort of positioned the populist revolts across Europe and South America, a response to the kind of power grab by organizations like the EU, the WHO, COP, and a kind of an attempt to take back control, to restore sovereignty to national parliaments. And he also talked about how Tony Blair had undermined the sovereignty of Parliament with the Human Rights Act, the Climate Change Act, the Equality Act, all legislation that had bound his successors, tied the hands of his successors. And he criticized Blair for creating the Supreme Court, our highest judicial body used to be within Parliament, the Law Lords. Now they're outside Parliament. That was a constitutional precedent, separating powers for the first time, taking a powerful body that makes important political decisions outside Parliament and making it unaccountable to Parliament. So he managed to produce, I thought, quite a coherent kind of narrative, linking PopCons with the wider global populist revolt, and that was quite compelling, I thought.
Well, you make him sound like Jacob Rees-Bannon, sort of party of Davos, like talking like Steve Bannon. A lot of the European stuff going on in Europe, aligning with that, the problem with the party of Davos. So that sounds interesting. I'm a bit skeptical that Blair tied their hands. I mean, Cameron allowed his hands to be tied, didn't he? And called himself the heir to Blair. I mean, we might talk about in the paid section this Tony Blair leadership manual, but I mean, I put this post. Blair's written a leadership manual. He wishes he was given in '97. He's giving it to Starmer. I made this claim. Every prime minister since Tony Blair has been Tony Blair. Cameron was clearly Blair. All the other Tories were Blair. And now Starmer will be handed a literal manual written by Tony Blair. The only question is, will we finally get an opposition to the Blair party? Some people told me, well, Boris wasn't like Blair, and you can debate that. But the point is, they've been stuck in what Carl Benjamin calls the Blairite paradigm. So it sounds like Mogg is admitting that, but sort of still blaming Blair rather than. I mean, surely they could have just got in and torn up some of that legislation on day one.
Yes. It was one of the slight oddities about it was they sort of sounded like a party in opposition. Rather than the party that's been the party of government for the last 14 years. And a lot of the criticisms Liz Truss made of, what Conservatives hadn't done, in some respects, could have been made of her, though I guess in her defence, she did try and do a little bit more, and that's why she was ejected. But one of the themes of her speech was, Conservatives have been too timid. Conservatives have wanted to curry favour with the kind of liberal intelligentsia. They haven't been willing to risk social exclusion from Islington dinner parties. She said, I don't have that problem. I'm never invited to London dinner parties, which may be true.
She came to the GB News party.
Yeah,
that was in London.
But I guess in the PopCon's defence, they'd say, okay, Tony Blair has only tied the hands of his successors because they've been too timid to break the bonds, but we'd be less timid if you elect our faction, or if our faction prevails. But it wasn't immediately clear who their leadership candidate is, and Mark Littlewood started off by saying, as I said in my Times column a couple of days ago, I don't think we should replace Rishi Sunak before the next election. I am foursquare behind the Prime Minister before then going on to criticise him in almost every respect. So.
Yeah, I mean that's the line a lot of people are taking. It's Suella Braverman, very similar on GB News, and Kemi, very similar. But yeah, they're not going to replace him now. But yeah, I mean the danger is there'll just be a party in the wilderness saying things that I agree with, but just in the wilderness that they didn't actually do in power. And I think that is kind of inexcusable. Why didn't they do them? Why were they so timid? And it's because they basically agree. I mean, they're basically a vaguely left wing or globalist party. They basically agree with Blair, and most people are. I mean, even Liz Truss used to be a Lib Dem. She's seen the light maybe now. They are that party. There was something else I wanted to respond to. You said as well. Oh, the opposition thing. That's the thing. And Rishi, even in the Conservative conference, sounded like he was in opposition, and he was a hard sell as a change candidate. It seemed very weird. It didn't suit his persona, and it didn't suit the fact that he's the prime minister. But they are. But the way that they are the opposition, of course, is that we've had this stealth revolution, the cultural revolution, the Blair revolution, the woke revolution, whatever it is. We all see it. We've had a complete revolution in all our institutions. Everyone knows that now. The only people who debate that are people who are trying to gaslight you because they like it. So they are the opposition. They have been the opposition the whole time because the civil service has a certain set of beliefs that also the Bank of England has, that also corporations go along with now, starting to crack a little bit with the DEI stuff falling apart. But they have been, in effect, the opposition. This has been a strange paradox of the Conservatives. Or they've been a Cameron figure who just goes along with it and loves it. Or they've been, in effect, the opposition if they say anything conservative. So that has been the strange. And you think, why have you not been able to seize levers of power? And Dominic Cummings talks about it. It is very hard to do because you can't oust anyone in the civil service.
Yes. I mean, it's as though, someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg, love him though I do, before becoming business secretary, before, getting his hands on the levers of power, he talked a big game about the blob and about wresting back control from civil servants and restoring parliamentary sovereignty. Gets into power, gets his hands on the levers of power, doesn't seem to do a great deal. And then after he's left power, then complains that the blob are still in charge. And you think kind of like, well, yeah, and the moral here must be that if you want to wrest back control from the blob, you need a detailed plan of action. And that was the lacuna in the PopCon's manifesto as unveiled today. It's all very well to complain about, power leaking away from Parliament towards these unelected national and international organizations, institutions. But what are you going to do about it? How are you going to take back control? And that was one of the shortcomings of Brexit. Kind of, we're going to take back control. We voted to leave the EU, but turned out that all that really happened was that control shifted from, bureaucrats in Brussels to bureaucrats in Whitehall, and Parliament, the people, never really took back control.
Yeah. And just one other thing on all this. I mean, Mogg, I hate to criticize a colleague, and he's a great man, but Rees-Mogg did back Cameron at the time. He went to school with Camden. He certainly went to Oxford with him, and they all, it's not like he's very loyal to the party, so it's not like he was out there saying that. Maybe he was saying it in private and doing what he can. It's hard to criticize without being part of it. Maybe he was doing what he could. I know he was skeptical about lockdowns reasonably early and things like that. So maybe. And did you get a sense? Because the policies you're describing seem kind of Farage-esque, the agenda. He was there allegedly just in his capacity as a GB News broadcaster, so there's a loophole there. Did you get the sense that this is really the Farage party, or is it just the Liz Truss party and Farage was just there as a journalist?
Well, I think a lot of the policies they were setting out, including on net zero, they were a little bit sort of lily-livered about that. They weren't as kind of fulsome in their assault on net zero as Richard Tice and Nigel Farage have been. It was like sort of the agenda that they set out was like the Reform Party light, but it was certainly closer to Farage's agenda than Conservatives have been in the past. So if I would have thought that if he does if he does at some point rejoin, and I think he said, last week that he hasn't ruled it out, then this is probably the faction he'd be aligned with, though whether they'd embrace him as their leadership candidate remains to be seen.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, speaking of the leadership, I saw this poll from More in Common. I don't really trust More in Common because I saw a couple of dodgy stories this week, and they were behind them. And they were this think tank that was set up in the wake of Joe Cox's murder. And I don't totally trust them. But in the poll, Penny Mordaunt was ahead by 26 points, and everyone else was just nowhere. I mean, so that's a very different view. We're all thinking, oh, we need to get the party to do something conservative. But actually, Penny Mordaunt was storming this poll. Did you see that?
I did see that. Yeah, it was quite worrying in that it suggests that if there is a leadership election, whether before or after the general, Penny Mordaunt will be in pole position to succeed Rishi Sunak and not Kemi Badenoch. But I think one thing we can say to placate fears along those lines is that let's suppose there isn't a change of leadership. And the Conservative Parliamentary Party is wiped out, and Reform polls between 15 and 20% of the vote, and that's one of the reasons the Parliamentary Tory Party is wiped out. It would be hard, I think, in those circumstances for people to say, we need Penny Mordaunt. She's the answer to all our problems. I think it would have to be someone much closer to Reform, so that would help Kemi and not Penny.
Yeah, I don't think if Penny gets in as leader, then you have to have a separate party of some sort. Surely the right of the party breaks off. You can't get behind Penny. She's ultra woke, looks good with a ceremonial sword, but apart from that, just ultra woke. Can't see anything conservative about her. So surely that I don't know. If it happens, then surely the other side have to do something. I don't know what it is. They get together with Reform, or I don't know what happens in that scenario. But
yeah, I would have thought
would
that would be that. I mean, they'll both. I would have thought that people in both camps will argue that if you elect the leader in the other camp, it'll cause the party to split. But actually, I think you're right. It would be more likely to split if Penny became the leader than if Kemi became the leader. I think Kemi is a more credible unity candidate than Penny. Penny is, for my mind, too closely associated with the left of the party, certainly with the kind of LGBTQ plus wing of the Parliamentary Conservative Party.
because of a gay activist twin brother.
Yeah.
Who's kind of into the trans stuff. Yeah, I mean, one quick thing on that. So we had a quite a long email from Peter, one of our esteemed listeners. So thank you, Peter. And he was excoriating, is that the word? Kemi. I mean, he was just saying Kemi is part of. He seemed to think I didn't know about the A list, which of course I do. Cameron's A list, and his point was that Kemi was just a diversity hire. The Cameron A list. That's why she got through. No white man was allowed to get through. Cameron was proud about this. This is one of the many Blairite moves of Cameron that's really kind of sickening. Although you strangely said that Cameron was one that was a very effective leader, and Peter was the sort of lambasting you for that. But his point was Kemi's a diversity hire. She's part of the A list. Don't believe the hype. It's all Cameron woke nonsense. And actually, she won't appeal to voters. She comes across arrogant, and she's not the answer. What do you think to that?
Well, I don't think you can blame Kemi for getting onto the candidates list, under Cameron as part of a kind of pro-diversity drive. That may be true. I don't know, but nevertheless, she seems to be the most impressive candidate to emerge from the A list, I think, and I think she's parted. I don't think she was ever a Cameroonian, if that's the word, a Cameroon. I remember when she worked at the Spectator, which is when I first got to know her. She would say to you, I am a deeply conservative person. I don't think you realise just how conservative I am. She was keen to emphasize, and at that stage, I don't think had any ambitions to become an MP, let alone leader of the party. I think she was just keen to drive home to those she met that she was a genuine, passionate, red-blooded conservative. So I don't think she can be accused of being, another heir to Blair.
Okay. His other point was that she had been in Nigeria till about age 16, and that this was an issue because it sort of means you haven't fully absorbed British culture. So that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake too. I think actually, curiously, some of the people who are most patriotic are people who have either arrived themselves in this country, having fled a kind of corrupt dictatorship, as in Kemi's case, or they're the sons or daughters of migrants. Often, the intelligence services recruit from the children of recently arrived migrants or people who arrived as migrants in their teens. It's I think embracing this country, believing in this country, being patriotic um, uh, uh, is often because you've recently experienced or your parents experienced the horrors of living in a less civilized country in which the rule of law didn't prevail, in which there wasn't the same tradition of liberty and respect for property rights and so forth. So I don't think that's a black mark. I think that's a positive.
Okay. Well, that bit ran slightly longer than I thought, but it's very interesting to get the inside scoop on PopCon. I'm not quite sure about the name. Sounds a bit like popcorn. I don't know if that's the idea, but yeah, PopCon. And they might want to change that. Not sure what to, but may want to go back to the drawing board on that. But very interesting. All right, so that was PopCon, and now let's get into our sort of main stories of the week. We have to start with the Asylum Seeker attack, whatever you want to call it. This guy Abdul, who I'm sure you all know was a convicted sex offender, applied for asylum twice, didn't get in, got in on the third go because he said he was a Christian. That's the new thing. You just say you're a Christian, they go, okay, yeah, we'll let you in. Then he attacks a woman and her daughters, who are 3 and 8 years old, I believe. Then he goes missing. Police put out a 20K reward. They tell him to turn himself in, which was an interesting tactic, mocked by some online. Then they offered a £20,000 reward. Now I saw a thing today as we record from Nick Aldworth, a former national counter-terrorism coordinator, who says he might already be dead, might have already killed himself. But I was sort of, well, I was going to say I was more interested. Obviously, the event itself is important and horrific. Then there's the fallout from the event. And I'm sure you've all seen some of the disgusting gaslighting following this. The thing that really bothered me was the Guardian headline: chemical attack, police hunt injured man. So imagine seeing, I mean, if you read that blind, you'd think, oh, what, this poor injured man? Why are the police hunting him? So the Guardian managed to sound like they're siding with the violent criminal, which was just so Guardian. I mean, the Guardian just love nothing more than a violent criminal. I posted, I hope you find someone who loves you as much as lefties love a violent criminal, asylum seeker who attacks people with corrosive substances. I mean, they just love someone like that. And then we had the Newsnight piece with Kirsty Walk, Caroline Noakes, and some other person, and they were all saying, "Oh yeah, it's not really about asylum. This is about toxic masculinity and microaggressions and incel culture." Like, what's about incel? What are you talking about? An asylum seeker just poured a corrosive substance on people and attacked women and children, and you're going, it's about, basically they're saying it's about Andrew Tate, and I knew that was going to happen. And then a young man on GB News, of all places, a guest, not some regular, a guest, because we have to have balance, did actually literally blame Andrew Tate. And I knew it was going to happen. I had a BBC on my bingo card rather than GB News, but it always comes back to Andrew Tate, boys in school. And it's just like, you people are just beyond parody at this point. Of course, Matthew Stadland playing it down and not all asylum seekers and blah, blah, blah. No one's saying it's all asylum seekers, but we're saying in this case, clearly asylum was relevant because he tried to claim asylum 3 times, got in, was already a criminal, should never have been in the country. Gillian Keegan was perhaps the most disgraceful because she's an alleged conservative, and she came on Sky and said, "Oh yeah, it's not really an asylum issue." I mean, what are you talking about? I have that story here with me. Not really an asylum issue. I mean, how on earth is it not an asylum? She said, not really about asylum. And she went on and said, oh, I'm more worried about the... Pressed on whether she was concerned about the case, she replied, I'm concerned actually there's a mum and 2 children who are in hospital. Yeah, it's both though, isn't it? I mean, we're all concerned about the women and children in hospital, but it's like, we're also concerned about the completely failed asylum system. What is going on here, Toby?
Yeah, it's whenever something like this happens, there seems to be a coordinated effort to deflect attention from the real issue. And the issue here is that we are far too lax about who we grant asylum to. And it really doesn't matter uh, uh, how dubious the people are and what danger they might pose to members of the public. We seem to be just incredibly permissive in who we grant asylum to. And the critical factor in this guy's case seemed to be the fact that he converted to Christianity. He failed twice to be granted asylum, but succeeded on the third try because at that point he'd converted to Christianity. He found a credulous Anglican priest who decided that yes, he was sincere in his professed belief in Jesus Christ and accepted him into the church. And it was on that basis, seemingly, well, that was a contributory factor to him being granted asylum. And there was another, wasn't there an archbishop who boasted about the number of asylum seekers he'd converted to Christianity, somehow imagining it was to do with his extraordinary powers and as a speaker and as an evangelist, when in fact he's just being scammed by these grifters wanting to expedite their asylum applications. And it's sort of shocking to me that, I mean, there are many shocking aspects of this story, but the complicity of the Church of England in, helping people like this acid attacker gain asylum without seemingly any thought to the potential threat they might pose to, innocent women and children. It's like, why is that? You can see why they might sort of tell themselves that giving these asylum seekers who profess to be Christians, and apparently, there was what's that ship called again? There's the sort of where various asylum seekers are housed. Like the rate of conversion to Christianity on this kind of cruise ship, this barge, is like 40% of them are converted. But you can see why, I suppose, these kind of earnest, kind of knitted brow Christian vicars would think that they want to give these poor, beleaguered migrants from far-flung parts of the world fleeing conflict zones, why they want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Oh, they've seen the light, and they presumably support, giving asylum to as many people as possible in any event. But you'd think they would at some point have at least a thought for the potential danger that they might pose to women and children, as this guy did.
Yeah, the barge is the Bibi Stockholm, by the way, which
The Bibi Stockholm, yeah.
sounds like Greta Thunberg's half sister. I've just realised. But the phenomenon you're talking about is the conversions. The one that struck me, because Suella Braverman and Priti Patel have been talking about this. There was the guy that detonated the bomb outside Liverpool Women's Hospital in 2021, having been confirmed at Liverpool Cathedral in 2017. And in 2016, the dean of the cathedral at the time, I'm quoting from the Telegraph, said he had converted 200 asylum seekers in 4 years, but added, I can't think of a single example of somebody who already had British citizenship converting here with us from Islam to Christianity. Do you not work out the ruse at some point? No one who's already British is converting. It doesn't really happen. Famously, not many people from Islam convert to Christianity. You had like Ayaan Hirsi Ali. This is like an international story when someone does it because it's quite rare, and obviously she's famous, but not many people do it, and it's a big deal, and it comes with quite a lot of risks. And one thinks of the Asia Bibi case and things like this. Did she convert or was she just already Christian? I'm not sure, but you don't convert very easily from Islam to Christianity. So the fact that they're all asylum seekers and you've done 200 of these, I mean, are they just lefties? Are they gullible? Do they think, oh, good, we're getting more Christians because Christianity is struggling? It's like, yes, but you're not getting real Christians. I mean, how can they be so? I know the Church of England is wet, but are they really just that stupid and gullible?
Well, maybe they're not stupid. Maybe they just maybe they're knowingly complicit. That they believe in open borders. They think that we ought to welcome these the tired and huddled masses to our breast. They think of that as part of their Christian mission. So they're willing to just say whatever it takes to help these people secure British citizenship. In the case of Abdul Azidi, the acid attacker, he had apparently told friends that he was going to return to Afghanistan now that he'd secured British citizenship to find a bride. And you'd think, well, if you've converted to Christianity, why are you returning to Afghanistan to find a good Muslim bride? Seemed a bit, seemed to suggest that he hadn't made a full conversion.
You're trying to say, Toby, this sex offender, asylum seeker, gaming system gamer is not entirely straight up. He's not a straight up. He's not a straight shooter. He's not a stand-up guy.
One of the extraordinary things about this story, Nick, was after the attack, he was photographed in film, captured on CCTV, in I think a Tesco in King's Cross on the Caledonian Road or somewhere near the Caledonian Road, and if you see, the still from the CCTV footage, it looks like half his face has melted off. He's clearly been injured in the course of trying to injure other people with this kind of corrosive substance. And it seems like one of his eyes has been destroyed. I mean, he looks like, something out of one of the Batman films. But seemingly no one batted an eyelid in the Tesco's on Caledonian Road. Only in contemporary Britain, in an inner city, could someone go shopping in Tesco's at midnight with half their face melting away, and no one bats an eyelid.
Exactly, I see that kind of thing every day just down my street. You just walk away. You don't look. Yeah, I was thinking about that. How did no one catch him? And one explanation is you see this guy with half his face missing. He looks terrifying, and the story hasn't broken yet, so you don't go, that's the technically alkaline attacker, that's the corrosive substance attacker guy. You go, I'm getting away from this guy. So in a way, although you might still report it as something, they do say on the tube, if you see anything unusual, it's like, that's pretty unusual. Although, like you say, not that unusual in London these days. If you see anything unusual, like someone missing half their face, report it to Transport Police. I mean, so presumably, right, you see it, you just go, but then in retrospect, surely, at least once they've heard about the story, they then would report it. Yeah, I mean, how has he got away? It is, has he gone to ground? Has he found someone to help him, a friend or whatever? Or has he killed himself, as this guy, Nick Aldworth, says?
There was some poll I saw in connection with this story. Someone pointed out that British Muslims have been asked if they'd turn over another Muslim who was a fugitive from justice to the police, and only something like, this may be an exaggeration, 10% said they would. So I suppose it's conceivable, Nick, that he may have persuaded some fellow Muslims that his Christian conversion wasn't 100% authentic, and they have in fact provided him with refuge.
Right, in a mosque or a gym or something. Yeah, very conceivable. And the other story along these lines was the convicted Bangladeshi wife killer dodges deportation by converting to Christianity. This was in The Sun. And just to prove this is a trend, this guy claimed to be a Christian convert, but the judge didn't buy it initially. A judge had ruled at his initial hearing he'd failed to repent of his wrongdoing, which the Christian faith would surely require for a genuine conversion. But he was granted another appeal because the decision should be objective and evidence-based and should not lapse into unhelpful speculation regarding the workings of the appellant's conscience. Well, yeah, maybe, but when you see it's just, I mean, common sense must kick in at some point, surely.
Do you think it would be too illiberal to say to asylum seekers that profess to have converted to Christianity, okay, that's fine, we'll take that into account in your asylum application, but we're going to put you on our website as Muslim apostates, as people who have left the Muslim religion and become Christians? I imagine that might put some of them off.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be terrible for the ones that were genuine, because that's one thing they would rightly fear. But for the ones that aren't, which seems to be all the asylum seeker ones, I mean, you just need to be a bit smarter. I mean, how would you apply the system? Because it's obvious if you're gaming the asylum, it's just if you're an asylum seeker, it's so obvious that that's what you're doing. But how do you actually? What legislation could you put into place to say you're obviously not sincere? Would you test them on the Bible? They could learn the Bible, of course. They could just swat up.
Yeah,
Hold the cross up to them, see if they melt.
My friend Sean Langan, who was kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan, at one point was asked whether he wanted to convert to Islam. He realized that this was being dangled in front of him as an opportunity to save his life. But he didn't think they would take it seriously. And it would just be essentially just a way of psychologically torturing him, persuading him that they initially believed him and that they weren't going to kill him, only to then tell him they didn't believe him. So he didn't avail himself of that opportunity. He said that it was something he'd need to think about more deeply because it was such an important decision, or something along those lines, which
That's
he said
quite
was
clever.
Probably the right answer.
Yeah, playing the grey man.
But,
I've watched SAS Who Dares Wins. It's given can be vague.
Yeah. Anyway,
but how did he get out? I mean, how did he get out?
Eventually, a ransom was paid.
Wow. So yeah, he just stalled for time. Wow.
Yeah, he was only kidnapped for about 3 months, but it was still pretty harrowing.
That sounds quite a long time. They were going to say 3 days, 3 months.
Sorry,
with the Taliban.
No, I shouldn't have used the word only there.
Only.
Yeah. Feared for his life on an almost daily basis, yeah.
Toby's like back after 3 months. Where you been? Kidnapped by the Taliban. What, for only 3 months? Stop banging on about it. Like some of the reviews of me, like, stop banging on about your problems. Like, oh, sorry, I've been captured by the Taliban for 3 months. Does that bother you? Okay. All right, well, we got another similar-ish story, which maybe we should move on to. We sort of covered that. And what can you say? The guy is still out there as we record. We don't know. Or is he out there? It's all very appalling. Actually, what did you think of Gillian Keegan's interview, just specifically when she gaslit, or Newsnight gaslighting, all of them?
Yeah.
But particularly the Tory one, like, what was the policy there? Because you've already failed the public over 14 years or whatever. Do you really think gaslighting the public is the way to win the election?
Well, I imagine that before appearing, she had called someone at CCHQ to get the line. And the official line, I imagine, was nothing to do with asylum seeking. Because if she said, I blame our faulty process for approving asylum applications, that would have been an implied criticism of the Home Office. And we can't have a Tory cabinet minister criticising a department which another Tory cabinet minister is in charge of, or which a Tory was in charge of at the time this asylum application was granted. So I imagine that's probably what was responsible for what did feel like gaslighting.
Right. Yeah. You end up. Yeah. It's politics, but it just plays incredibly badly with the public. It just sounds kind of insane and insulting and ridiculous. And the one thing about the asylum system, we always hear like, oh, it has to be more efficient. But all it would do then is efficiently process more of these nutters. At least it's inefficient and delays them a bit. What we really need is to deport them all. But that's another thing you hear, isn't it? Oh, it's inefficient. It's like, that's not really the issue. The issue is we're letting in loads of dangerous nutters who pretend to convert to Christianity. What another shocking scandal for this country. Speaking of shocking scandals, let's do this other somewhat related story. This is Mike Friel. And this broke, I think, maybe a day after we last recorded. It feels like a long time ago now, the way things move in this news cycle. But this was, of course, Mike Friel, MP, Tory MP, stepping down from Finchley and Golders Green. And he wrote a long letter about it. And he had death threats, very credible ones, because one of them was from the guy who later did murder Sir David Amess, shockingly. And there was also an arson attack, which I think is a pretty good reason and pretty solid evidence that something bad is going on. And then he put out this resignation letter. It's basically because of the threats and intimidation and the threat to his family and his personal safety. And but one thing that I noticed in the letter that was kind of absurd was that even when he's stepping down because of death threats and arson, he feels compelled to say, "It has been the privilege of my life to serve the wonderful, diverse and vibrant area that is Finchley and Golders Green." I was like, we praise diversity even when we're kind of being threatened. I mean, fiery but mostly peaceful diversity comes to mind. I mean, you've just had an arson attack because of one aspect of diversity. Not all diversity, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of a weird thing that he has to restate his religion there. And there's another element to that as a gay man, that he perhaps sees himself as part of whatever this thing is, diversity, under that umbrella. But there's an interesting distinction now. We're seeing that really gay men, in lots of ways, in the woke culture war, are on a different side. You have they're attacked by the trans activists, or they're even being attacked now sometimes by gender critical feminists, weirdly. And it's like, okay, maybe gay men are not really on that side. So when you talk about diversity, there's clearly diversity and diversity. I mean, there's one thing to be a gay man, but that is at odds with being a radical Islamist, clearly. So it's not that simple, is it? And it's kind of quite strange that he felt the need to do that. But mainly, of course, I massively sympathise with him that he's had to do this, and it's disgusting. The main note is it's disgusting that he felt he had to do this, and that we've been so wet about it. Robert Jenrick now has spoken quite strongly about it, but he's stepped down from his position. Once people are stepped down, they get more bold. But after David Amos, it was all about online safety, and now after Mike Freer, it's all about, well, there's been talk about online abuse and things like that. Is anyone going to do anything about any of this?
Well, Lindsay Hoyle in the House of Commons, when responding to the news that Mike Freer had announced his resignation because he essentially fears for his life, said MPs need to start being nicer to each other, as though he'd received a death threat from another member of the House of Commons. It was like, no, Lindsay, I don't think that's quite the issue here. But again, just another example of misdirection, of a refusal to stare the problem in the face, and the pretense that it's not about radical Islam, it's about something else entirely. And seemingly Mike Freer, as you say, was reluctant to blame radical Islam, even though he himself said that he'd only escaped being killed by the guy who murdered David Ames by the skin of his teeth. And clearly the death threats he's received as the Jewish MP representing a Jewish constituency have been from, Muslim radicals, and the people who firebombed his office, presumably Muslim radicals. But even he said, but not that I'm in any way criticizing multiculturalism, diversity. And interestingly, when he actually resigned from Boris Johnson's government in 22, he was the Minister for Exports and Equality, and resigned because he felt that Boris's government had created an atmosphere of hostility for LGBT plus people. So clearly a member of the LGBT plus conservative parliamentary lobby, and didn't want to in any way be kind of claimed as someone on our side in the culture war, or cited as Exhibit A in the failure of multiculturalism. So it was very keen to emphasize that he didn't want to be taken as an example in that way. It was odd.
People would literally rather burn to death than be on our side, Toby. I mean, I take that quite personally. You know what I mean? Yeah, these guys firebombed me and tried to kill me, but hey, they're for diversity and multiculturalism. At least they're not Toby Young. I mean, that's kind of like, that is the position, though, isn't it? It's like, oh, I'm not part of them. And he was elected in 2010, and I think someone said this, he's another A-lister, and that's very possible that he's in there because he's gay, not just because of that. He may be good at his job as well, but is he another Cameron A-lister, and therefore part of all that? The Blairite revolution. Very worrying, very weird. I mean, the fact that people can't just stand up and say what it is, I understand they're afraid, but if he's afraid, that's one reason. I mean, it seems like he has good reason to be. But if it's just that you're so ideological that you can't see what's right in front of you, then that's
Yeah.
mental. Were you going to add something? Otherwise, I'm going to go on to the Anne Clark.
Yeah. There was one other example of this, but I'm struggling to find it quickly enough. Which was the father, I think, of one of the people who was killed by the guy in Nottingham. He was a student at Nottingham University. At the funeral, praised multiculturalism and diversity. It was as though, like Mike Freer, even though his own experience was a perfect illustration of the shortcomings of multiculturalism. I mean, this guy paid an unbelievably high price, but nevertheless felt duty bound to pay obeisance to what is, as you say, a kind of secular religion. It's like, don't take this as a criticism of our secular religion.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember the mother doing that in that speech over the Nottingham thing. Was that what you're thinking of? The mother doing that speech?
it was the mother. It was the mother. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it was the mother. Yeah, that's
I
right.
remember
Yeah.
that. That was so disturbing. Yeah, what can you do with that? The ideological programming is so strong. That's so weird. That is a leftist worldview, though. I mean, you believe in the ideology over even your own family, and it's so weird. It's so weird to someone who thinks of in terms of family as the essential unit of society. It's a completely different way of thinking. That's just so disturbing. Um, the follow up on the Mike Freer thing was that Anne Clark, who is a councillor for Cricklewood, posted this thing. Just need Theresa for the hat trick of Barnet Tory MPs. So this shocking post above Mike Freer's resignation letter. The guy's had death threats, arson attacks, and you're like, lol, just need the hat trick. Now that would seem ostensibly evil, but she actually put out this apology. Last night I tweeted an insensitive post without having properly read the letter I was referring to. I would never intentionally seek to cause division and upset over such a serious issue as an elected official's personal safety. Even when you've been in politics a long time, it's still possible to make mistakes, and it was a huge error on my part not to fully read the letter before passing comment. I offer my apologies to anyone who was upset by my original post, which I deleted almost straight away. I've also made a private apology to Mike Freer. So what we're left with, okay, maybe she's not evil, just stupid, because who comments something like that on a resignation letter without reading it? Or do we not believe her? I mean, Josh Howie on Headliner said he plain didn't believe her. I sort of do believe her because I think it's so extreme. I do see the wider theme that Labour left wing women think it's a victory to bring in to side with radical Islam. It'd be a very Pyrrhic victory. It'd be an extremely short lived victory. The day Sharia law is introduced, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, we got those Tories out. Yeah, well, here's your new outfit, by the way. Just stick on the hijab, whatever it is. Just like, it's going to be like a very short-lived win for them. So it's the most absurd alliance, as many people have commented many times. The left wing, the lefty white woman, and the radical Islamist. But maybe she wasn't doing that. She was just a crass post, and she didn't read it. What do you think, Toby?
Yes, it was extremely crass, and it seemed to be an example of tribal politics trumping
Gone
human
mad.
empathy. Yeah, in which all she saw was the prospect of Labour winning the seat if his resignation, I guess, prompts a by-election. Yeah, mad.
Celebrating a culture where you can be death threatened out of your position, as if it couldn't then happen to her the next day, and celebrating that for us all to live in a culture where our politicians have to stand down because of death threats and arson attacks, and you're saying, "Oh, win for me." I mean, that's so unbelievably stupid. But do you believe her is the key point
yeah,
that she didn't read it? That's the key.
yeah. I mean, I have no idea.
Okay.
But one of the reasons it was unwise, as you say, is because Labour MPs, I think, have been threatened much more, attacked, abused by Muslim radicals in the past, sort of since the October 7th attack. They've been much more likely to be targeted than Conservative MPs because they've those that didn't vote for a ceasefire in that parliamentary vote, that's thought to be a betrayal, and radical Muslims are much angrier with Labour MPs for not supporting the call for a ceasefire than they are with Conservative MPs, for whom I imagine that's just priced in. So very short-sighted to in any way excuse the threats to Mike Freer on the grounds that it may mean a by-election victory for Labour.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we certainly agree on that, and I'm sure the listeners will. And so maybe we can finish on that story. All right. Well, now let's do another big story that Toby was very much part of. This is the Premier League Stasi, as you called it, Toby, and poor old Lindsay Smith, the Newcastle United fan, who's been effectively spied on by the club for her views on the trans issue, which is just so mental. I don't even know where to begin. But you put out this very effective and well-made film, I must say, made with Alex and you in association with the Free Speech Union, and you were interviewing Lindsay Smith about her story. But do you want to explain it for us all?
Yes, so this is Lindsay is a Newcastle United fan. She's been a fan of the Magpies all her life. She spent thousands of pounds on tickets to games, merchandise. I mean, a real die-hard Newcastle United fan, an ultra fan. And she found herself placed under investigation last year after uh, a trans rights activist complained about things Lindsay had said on her Twitter account, things like trans women aren't women. And you would have thought that Newcastle United, receiving this complaint, would have just told the complainant, as politely as possible, well, what a fan says about this political issue outside the ground, provided she hasn't said it to any of our players or our officials or our employees, hasn't even said it to another Newcastle fan, it's really none of our business. Um, so, you're just going to have to lump it. But instead, they took it seriously enough to ask the Premier League to investigate Lindsay. And by that, they meant look at other things she'd said on social media and compile a dossier on her. So it turns out the Premier League has this shadowy intelligence unit, which was set up in 2019, whose job it is to look at the social media posts of football fans of Premier League clubs, to see if they are people who should be allowed to attend games. Now, you can imagine that this was originally set up to try and find football hooligans who were trying to organise fights, or racists who were responsible for racist abuse of players and officials in grounds. But there's been an enormous amount of scope creep, seemingly, since this policy was put in place and the surveillance unit set up. And now they're not just monitoring people for hooliganism, racism, homophobia, but for so-called transphobia too. And this unit compiled a 14-page dossier on Lindsay, which included such details as where she walks her dog, what the name of the church is, which is near her home. It said she had connections to Whitby Bay. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. And the Premier League handed this dossier to NUFC, who, on the strength of it, well, they then alerted Northumbria Police and said, we think that this woman may have committed a hate crime by saying she didn't think trans women were women. And Northumbria Police, needless to say, then went round to Lindsay's house and threatened her with arrest if she didn't come down to the station to be interviewed under caution, which she duly did. But after a couple of hours, the police reluctantly concluded that actually nothing she'd said was against the law. And you would have thought that, having passed this back to Newcastle United's, diversity and inclusion department, no, nothing she said was unlawful. They would have then, said, okay, no case to answer, drop the investigation. But no, they decided to impose a ban on Lindsay attending games until the end of the 2026 season. So she's been banned from attending games for the rest of this season and banned for the next 2 seasons because of her supposedly transphobic comments on Twitter. It's absolutely extraordinary. This is the most egregious example, I think, the Free Speech Union has come across as kind of overreach of illegitimate interference in free speech by either a private or a public company. And we're doing our best to help Lindsay. We've helped to make a complaint to the information regulator, because we think that the fact that the Premier League compiled this dossier on her and then passed it on to Newcastle United is a breach of GDPR, of data protection. We're also helping her appeal the decision to ban her to the footballing ombudsman. There may be other legal remedies which we're exploring. We want to get her reinstated. We want the ban lifted if we can. But it is just, it's absolutely appalling. And the video, the film I made with Alex about it, 8-minute film, has got almost 3 million views. I mean, I think it really has struck a chord. I think even people who are usually pretty sanguine about woke corporations trying to stifle free speech and think that it's just a culture war trope and don't usually take it very seriously, I think are finally waking up to the fact that organisations like the Premier League, in their zeal to be diverse and inclusive, are engaging in a form of hyper-liberal McCarthyism. One of the ironies of this case, Nick, is that the views she expressed, far from being hate speech or a hate crime, are views which are shared by the majority of the British public, I imagine most Newcastle fans, and the owners of Newcastle United, which is, the Saudi royal family. Why is a club owned by the Saudi royal family persecuting a fan, and she's a lesbian, incidentally? Why are they persecuting her for expressing beliefs that presumably align with their own in certain respects? It's just a bizarre story. Absolutely shocking and appalling. And I hope we can get the ban lifted.
That is absolutely insane. Well, let's play a little clip from the film so people know what we're talking about.
So just to be clear, because you expressed your gender-critical beliefs on Twitter, Newcastle has banned you for the rest of this season and for 2 more seasons.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
Devastated. Just devastated. I mean, I live 10 minutes away. I struggle to even come near the ground now, to be honest with you. I get upset when I talk about it because I just don't understand where it's come from, I don't understand why someone's gotten so offended by me just speaking my mind. I don't get it, but I avoid the city now. I avoid it, especially if it's a match day. If I'm going home, I'll drive the long way round so I don't have to see people. I won't even come down here and drink anymore. I used to always be in Shearer's over the road, or I'd be in the Strawberry. I can't even bring myself to do that. Every time I come round here now, I'm just sick to my stomach. And I'm afraid of who's around, who's watching me, So it's just horrible.
All right, that was a clip from the film. I mean, the story, like you say, is so shocking in so many elements. I don't even know really where to begin. That particular wrinkle that the owners are, what are they? The Saudi owners of Newcastle, them persecuting people in this country for sort of not having extreme leftist woke views is so weird. It's kind of like Chinese infiltration. It's like weakening our country or something with things they don't actually believe. That's so strange. And like you also say, people will maybe finally wake up when it hits people where it hurts, which is football, wokeness in infiltrating football. I already wonder if football's too woke to watch and whether we all need to boycott it after this. But Toby, you wanted to add another element of the story as well.
Well, just to add to what you just said, it does seem to be a characteristic of the Premier League and Premier League clubs and the FA that they profess to be inclusive, they profess to believe in equality, to embrace the woke agenda, until such time as it in any way jeopardizes the vast amounts of money these clubs and various organizations are earning, hence the capitulation over the wearing of the rainbow armbands in the Qatari World Cup, the decision to award the World Cup in not the next one, not the one after that, but the one after that, it's going to take place in Saudi Arabia. It's like this complicity with kind of the sport washing that, autocratic Islamic dictatorships engage in by involving themselves in football and in the Premier League, buying Premier League teams, the complicity and the kind of the turning of a blind eye to the persecution of LGBT people in these Islamic countries. And yet at the same time, the kind of witch hunts of people like Lindsay for not signing up to every jot and tittle of the kind of radical progressive agenda in our country. I mean, it's just the kind of paradox couldn't be more obvious, kind of parallels there with anarcho-tyranny. But no, the only thing I wanted to add, Nick, was we don't think that Lindsay is an isolated case. We think that hundreds, possibly thousands of people have been similarly investigated by the Stadium Stasi, as we're calling this surveillance unit embedded in the Premier League. And we've got a form on the Free Speech Union's website whereby you can submit a subject access request, both to the Premier League team you support and to the Premier League, to see if a file has been opened on you. So please go to our website if you're a fan of a Premier League team and submit one of these SARs. And you can find that at freespeechunion.org/SAR/.
Absolutely shocking stuff. So go and do that. And poor old Lindsay, I've lived in Newcastle. I knew some of the pubs she mentioned in the film, and it's a massive part of the culture there, of course. So to be banned from the ground is a big deal. It's part of your identity. It's part of your culture. I mean, they don't have a right to do that. Football clubs come from working class culture and communities. It's the ultimate betrayal of the roots of football. We know that it's been infiltrated by woke centrist dads, and that's kind of the whole vibe with football now. But this is kind of the apotheosis of that, because to ban someone from their own club in their own town, what gives you a right to do that? Okay, if they've been in the stadium doing crazy stuff, assaulting people, or I don't know what, some crazy chant that's, well, I even think you should be allowed to do pretty crazy chants personally, because I think that's part of the culture as well. But for her views, I mean, insane. It's insane on all levels. The idea that a football team's spying on you obviously is just peak woke, off the charts, just unbelievable, dystopian, whatever you want to say. But then just that extra aspect that this is her community and her team really pisses me off. And this, and were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, where does the creep end? If Newcastle United think they can legitimately ban people from St James's Park for things they've said on Twitter, which we know aren't unlawful because they sicked the police on her and the police concluded there was no case to answer. If they're going to monitor what people say on Twitter outside the ground and not anything they say to anyone connected with the club, then what non-arbitrary reason do they have for not monitoring what people say to one another in pubs? Who's to say that that Newcastle United and the Stadium Stasi won't start monitoring what people say to each other on their way to and from games, in the pub beforehand, in the pub afterwards, at work? If they think they can legitimately police what you say, and not even anything unlawful on Twitter, why not in every other part of your private life as well? I mean, where does it end?
Yeah, great question. And what's so absurd about the Saudi aspect as well is that we'd almost be better off in a straight up authoritarian Muslim country. I mean, cleaner streets, presumably less stealing, but we'd still have, we're already, so we're in an authoritarian woke country, but we have the Saudis as well. I mean, and we also have all these problems with MPs stepping down because of Islamic death threats. So it's like we seem to have the worst of all worlds now. I mean, what culture are we in here? It's a kind of Islamic woke authority. It's like both types of dictatorship at once. I mean, just give me a Saudi country where I know the rules. You know what I mean? Like, women can't drive. I'm not going to steal anything. I like my hands. Just like,
yes. I mean, it's you make a good point. I think the fact that we're not officially a kind of woke theocracy, in some ways puts the non-woke, particularly the victims of the kind of witchfinder generals, at a disadvantage, because there's never really any proper due process. It wasn't clear exactly why. It wasn't clear what process Lindsay was being put through. The Free Speech Union helped her appeal the ban, and we appealed to the fact that gender critical beliefs are now protected philosophical beliefs under the Equality Act post Forstater. They are beliefs that the Court of Appeal has judged worthy of respect in a democratic society, and it's actually unlawful to discriminate against people because they express those beliefs. And that was just totally rejected out of hand by Newcastle United. It's like there is no obvious process. You can't appeal to the law. The fact that what she said wasn't against our laws wasn't enough to protect her. Seemingly, NUFC wants to go beyond what the law allows you to say and say, no, we have a higher standard. We're holding people to a higher standard. It's like there's no. It's all a kind of grey, murky, Kafkaesque zone in which people don't really know where they stand or how best to defend themselves.
And the capture of football is particularly repulsive for many reasons, because it's a working class tradition, because it's like our last refuge. I've already written articles in the past about maybe I'll stop watching it because of BLM, the ludicrous capitulation to that, the kneeling, the plastering of BLM everywhere, then the gaslighting. Oh no, we're just talking about general anti-racism. No, you're not. It's their literal logo. It's a radical left-wing organization that hates the family and hates the West and hates Israel and so on. And the rainbow laces, the rainbow armbands. My family were having a debate about this at one point. I won't mention which members, but someone more sound of opinion in the family said, "Well, why is it the rainbow laces now?" And someone else was like, "Oh, I don't know why it bothers people." Well, it bothers us. It obviously bothers someone, doesn't it? Because they wouldn't be doing it. It bothers us because they're doing all this, and we're the victims of it. If it wasn't important, they wouldn't be. It's obviously important to them. So why can it not be important to us to say no to it? It's just relentless. Then you've got the presenters, famously Joey Barton's talking a lot about constant diversity in the presenters. It doesn't matter about merit. You've got the obsession with women's football. I know some people like it, but you're not even allowed to not like it. Sadiq Khan will get you in his mate campaign. So football has been hijacked, as everything will be, and as everything has been by the woke revolution. I mean, another example I think of is comedy. When comedy was hijacked by the BBC, and my theory was, look, okay, you had this comedy like Live at the Apollo and things. Michael McIntyre, oh, it's funny, it's quite mainstream, people can laugh, great, quite cheap programming. Then they go, oh, hang on, this is powerful. This is watched by loads of people. Let's hijack it with our left-wing ideology. And then it becomes the Nish Kumarization of comedy. And comedy just becomes, you're scum because you voted Brexit, you're a racist, good night. And you go, oh, that seems different. So very much the same with football. Football, just a game for people to watch and let off steam and enjoy and follow the players and so on. And maybe they want to be a footballer, maybe they play themselves, whatever it is. Maybe they just enjoy it for all the family. Now becomes, as we have to be lectured relentlessly. So it's just a capture, and it's an obvious point, but it's the capture. You look at football, you say, this is a massive, powerful thing that reaches so many people. We can't waste this opportunity not to promulgate our ideology.
Yeah, I think it's been particularly vulnerable to woke capture because it's a sport associated with white working class men. And in the eyes of the woke high priests, they are, the problem. They are demons. They're the people who need to be re-educated. So they see this as a fantastic opportunity to re-educate some of the worst, most despicable people in our society. And the fact that the Premier League needs to sell its sell television rights around the world, sell merchandise, do these deals with video game makers and all the rest of it. All of those different sectors are also completely captured. So they have to kind of show that they are whiter than white, in order to kind of not to in any way jeopardize the kind of oceans of lucre just pouring into their coffers.
Yeah. The whole thing is so insane. I mean, luckily you've got your film and it's doing really well. And I think the fact that it's doing so well, as you say, suggests people are finally waking up to some of this. But that is a whole new level. Premier League clubs spying on their own fans. Are you going to stop watching though, Toby? Because I know you watch QPR, which is kind of not really involved in the Premier League anymore. But I don't know. Would you stop watching football?
Well, I don't think all clubs do it. I think some clubs, when vexatious complainants try and get them banned from the ground because they've said something they disagree with outside the ground, just tell the complainants to get knotted. And someone actually did tell me of an example of that. Someone had tried to get them banned, and their club didn't want anything to do with it. So I don't think it's absolutely ubiquitous yet, and QPR are not in the Premier League, and it may be some time before they're back in the Premier League. So at least I'm not going to be investigated by the Stadium Stars, at least not for the time being.
I do have a real problem being a lifelong Man United fan, and I barely have time to watch it now anyway. And because it's all so woke, I don't know if I should even watch it. I'm not sure. I'm on the fence about that. It is a joke. My granddad was right all those years ago when he said the only sport that's not corrupted now is darts. Darts, Nicky, only sport worth watching these days. That's what he said to me. And do you know what? It sounded funny at the time, but he was absolutely right. All right,
you can imagine though that they'll probably darts is the next frontier in the kind of march through the sports. The last vestige of kind of white working class culture. I imagine they think, there's plenty of people to re-educate in the darts community. Alcoholism, big problem amongst darts fans. We need to start proselytizing about the dangers of demon alcohol. You can imagine, they're going to make a concerted effort to ruin darts in the next sort of 12 months now that it's suddenly exploded.
Yeah, it would just be trans people of colour drinking a green juice. And you won't be able to throw. And the dart's far too violent a thing to throw, and it's too dangerous. So it'll just be trans people drinking green juice, placing something onto a board with Velcro. I think that's the most likely outcome. I'm almost certain that'll happen within the year. All right, that is the Premier League shocking story. Toby, would you like to do this week's advert?
Yep. So this is an ad from our most loyal sponsor, Thor Holt. We haven't heard from him for a while, but he's now bought another 6 ads. And so this is the first of 6 that you'll be hearing over the next 6 weeks, unless you're a premium subscriber, in which case you won't be hearing the ads. Anyway, it begins. Love to hear Christopher Hitchens' take on the 2020s. So with reverence to the great skeptic, today's read is dedicated to him. Ladies and gentlemen, skeptics all, gather round for a discourse on public speaking and career discovery. Indulge me briefly. Imagine yourself, glass in hand perhaps, engaging in self-discoveries with Thor, dissecting your present situation, unfolding future aspiration, no promise of the moon, nor shrouding discussion in undue mysticism. You shall together craft a narrative worthy of your own promise. The price, less than the value, and less than a decent bottle at £225. However, mere mention of Skeptic Podcast and a further £100 discount is yours. Still harbouring doubts? Admirable. Remember Hitchens' razor. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Therefore, hear Gemma, who was anxious and had lost her sparkle. Gemma continues, after my discovery with Thor, I was laughing again. I felt empowered. He helped me refocus and restructure my keynote in a way that landed a commanding and powerful message, and I then delivered it feeling confident, less nervous than I would have been. Thor has a way of being able to assess a situation, give sound, impactful advice, and eliminate the stress. You can contact Thor on WhatsApp on +44 07906 321 593. That's 07906 321 593. Or on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Thorholt. That's linkedin.com/in/Thorholt.
All right, well, now it's time for everyone's favourite section, which is Peak Woke. So, Toby, quite a few Peak Wokes this week. I mean, the most obvious one was the Labour MP, Charlotte Nichols, saying that people should be allowed to change gender after their death. This is the Labour MP for Warrington North. Pronouns in bio, unsurprisingly. Did you see that one?
I did see that one, yes. But not entirely surprising, because the Labour Party, having accused the Tories of talking up the culture war when there was really nothing to see, it was all just an invention of Tories desperate to be re-elected and talk about something other than the cost of living, last week announced that they were going to introduce a Race Equality Act, which, amongst other things, would extend, they said, equal pay rights to Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, as though, they're not already protected from being discriminated against by their employers. But the measures announced in this Race Equality Act were mandating ethnicity pay gap reporting, ensuring police officers and police staff undertake anti-racism training, as if they're not doing enough of that already, and reviewing the school curriculum to ensure it's suitably diverse, i.e. more decolonizing of the school curriculum. So they're doubling down on woke gobbledygook in schools, in the police, in the workplace, and accusing us, of waging the culture war.
Yeah, and I noticed they were also going to appoint a Windrush commissioner. No idea what that's going to be about. But yeah, I know it could get very, very woke. Maybe we'll discuss it in the paid section, whether Labour are going to be really woke, or whether they're going to follow Tony Blair and I don't know, even though he is woke, but he's sort of more hardline and ruthless about just winning and getting some things done. But let's see. Did you also?
And
See,
I saw Blair speak last week, Nick. I went to Derek Draper's funeral on Friday. I used to know him quite well in the mid-90s, and the one of the people who paid tribute to Derek was Tony Blair. So I'll talk about that in the paid section.
Okay, let's do that. And the other one I got was there was a Black Sense and Sensibility. So the Hallmark channel, which no one watches, presumably, are going to do a version of Sense and Sensibility, but with all black characters or mainly black lead characters. And one says, why? Why do we have to constantly erase everything white all the time and replace it with other non-white people? It's just like, at this point, you just say, why? What is it why do you hate white people so much? You have to erase everything white. I'm sort of done with all that. I'm just done with it.
Yeah, I haven't actually I never actually watched. What was the other? What was really the first series? What was it called again? In which it was kind of like a Regency period costume drama, and all the characters were black. All the actors were black.
There was an Anne Boleyn thing. There was Catherine.
But it was called Bridlington or something.
Oh, Bridgetown.
Bridgetown. Yeah. So Bridgetown. Anyway, were they just black actors playing kind of white characters, or did they kind of black up the story, as it were, in order to kind of make it more plausible that all the characters were being played by black actors? Is that, or in the case of Sense and Sensibility, will the pretense be that somehow there were black people living in, Bath in the 1820s, and this is the story of what their lives were really like, or will they just kind of ignore the fact that they're all black and just pretend that it is in fact the Jane Austen story that they're telling, and just ignore? I mean, how does it work?
I think it'd be the latter.
Okay.
I say this, Bridgerton it's called. I say this having never watched Bridgerton. I don't watch period dramas. I'm not really the target audience, so I'm just sort of mouthing off. But yeah, I presume it's just going to be, hey, this is all just normal, and history doesn't exist, stuff like that, probably. And then people say, why do you care? You're racist. Toby, do you want to do a peak woke?
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw this one, Nick, but some Anglo-Saxon warriors may have been transgender, according to an academic. So an academic who studied Anglo-Saxon burials in Kent through, quote, the lens of transness, unquote, believes that transgender women may have enjoyed high status in Anglo-Saxon society. I think what he means by that is
men.
Women. I mean, he means men. Yeah, to get this right, it's always a bit confusing. So he's looked at 7th century burials in Buckland in Dover, and because some of the burial chambers contain feminine, they apparently contain feminine goods, which are at odds with the sex of the person buried, which they've worked out through carbon dating or something. And he's interpreted these discrepancies through the lens of trans and concluded that they were in fact trans warriors.
Yeah,
it's extraordinary.
I'm very confused because it said transgender men in the one I saw. Some Anglo-Saxon warriors may have been transgender men. Which is that? Is that a mistake, or do they mean women? I don't know. Yeah, lens of transness. This guy's doing a PhD at University of Liverpool. Yeah, it's very, very tenuous. And the word may have been is working very hard there, isn't it? I mean, may have enjoyed high status, but probably it's just some other mistake, and there definitely weren't trans warriors.
It looks as I think his argument is that because some corpses which appear to be male were buried with some feminine artifacts, and vice versa, that therefore trans was a thing in Anglo-Saxon England.
That's a hell of a leap.
So I think it applies to, it's a hell of a leap. Yeah, a hell of a leap.
This looks like a female body and there's a sword here and vice versa. I mean,
could be Penny Mordaunt.
yeah,
Doesn't mean she's trans.
right. Maybe it was a female who happened to be good with swords. Oh, it'd be nice. She likes swords. Put a sword here. There must have been one or two women that were good with swords. I don't know. Probably allowed to secretly have a sword. Okay, I don't know. I've got no idea, but I do know this is. I know quite confidently this is bollocks. I say that with confidence. I mean, there's many we could pick. I've got a couple more that might apply. Is this Pete Woke? I mean, well, this one is U.S. man accused of destroying satanic temple statue charged with hate crime. So you had this satanic temple in Iowa who have actually brought this case against him. State was brought to the Capitol by the Satanic Temple of Iowa under state rules allowing religious displays in the building during the holidays. So it was this Baphomet statue, and this guy basically toppled it. I don't know if he took its head off, he just destroyed it because he's a total based legend, Michael Cassidy. And he did a great thing, if you ask me, but this has been called a hate crime. So they're at least admitting that they are literal Satanists and this is their religion. And if you, as a BLM rioter, topple Columbus, Jefferson, Washington, no hate crime charges. But if you take down Baphomet, you're in big trouble.
Yeah. There were a couple of BBC peak wokes. There was the scheduler for BBC Three, who posted and liked the most vile anti-Semitic content on Twitter, I believe.
Dawn Caver.
She's now parted company with the BBC.
Yeah.
And then there was another BBC journalist who became a paid witness in the deportation hearings of at least 15 Somalis who'd been, I think, convicted of crimes. She testified on their behalf and in some cases prevented them from being deported.
Wow. Yeah, I saw the Dawn Caver one, which was that she put all these extremist things about Jews, but also white people. It was very much Louis Farrakhan type of stuff. She said that white people are a barbaric, bloodthirsty, rapacious, murderous, genocidal, thieving, parasitical, deviant breed. But hey, we also have bad qualities. And she also referred to the Holocaust and stuff like this about Jewish people. It was mad stuff. I mean, the BBC, has anyone working there not done something weirdly anti-Semitic? And they all hate white people, we know that. But, is that just their hiring policy at this point?
I think it just reflects the fact that in the kind of woke church, Israel, Jews no longer enjoy victimhood status, so they're considered fair game by the radical progressives who see them as white settler colonialists. Did you see there was one comical storm in a teacup? Shakespeare's Globe has cast a woman to play Richard III in a forthcoming production. And that's caused a bit of a storm, not because a woman has been cast in a man's role, but because she's able-bodied and Richard III was famously disabled. The Globe has kind of placated these critics who are furious about this example of ableism and cripping up. Don't give a stuff that she's not the right gender, but are furious about the fact that she's able-bodied. And the Globe have said, well, she's not going to crip up. She's just going to pretend. She's not going to pretend to be hunchback or anything like that. She's just going to ignore the fact that that he had this disability, and in that way they've apparently solved the problem, which was never about the fact that a woman has been cast as Richard III.
Is crip up the accepted phrase then? I haven't heard that one.
I think it is. Maybe it's one of those phrases you can't use if you aren't yourself disabled. So I may get into trouble now.
Well, yeah, it could be that. It could be anything else we've said this week. All right. Well, that's pretty much peak woke. I might just add, I don't know what to call this section. I thought about adding, a little section called base department or peak based or who knows. People have various ideas, but just a sort of antidote to peak woke. And my candidate for that is that the New York Times has totally changed its tune suddenly on trans children. So there was an opinion piece from Pamela Paul. As kids, they thought they were trans. They no longer do. The New York Times has finally noticed that it can be a bad thing to transition as a confused child with a mental problem and to take puberty blockers and mutilate yourself in various ways that are usually irreversible. So she says here, progressives often portray the heated debate over childhood transgender care as a clash between those who are trying to help growing numbers of children express what they believe their genders to be and conservative politicians who won't let kids be themselves. But right-wing demagogues are not the only ones who have inflamed the debate. Transgender activists have pushed their own ideological extremism, especially by pressing for a treatment orthodoxy that has faced increased scrutiny in recent years. Under that model of care, clinicians are expected to affirm a young person's assertion of gender identity and even provide medical treatment before or even without exploring other possible sources of distress. Many who think there needs to be a more cautious approach, including well-meaning liberal parents, doctors, and people who have undergone gender transition and subsequently regretted their procedures, have been attacked as anti-trans and intimidated into silencing their concerns. So she's saying it's not just evil conservatives, it's good liberals, but it's a big change in the New York Times to go, maybe this isn't a good thing. Bit late, lots of people's lives have been destroyed before they reach this completely obvious conclusion. But yeah, it was pretty strange. I mean, and this proves what some people claim. There's a guy called Academic Agent. There's some others who say, look, maybe they're just going to put the woke away, as he says it, meaning just they'll suddenly just get rid of wokeness, the regime, if it doesn't suit them anymore. And it'll just happen very quickly and suddenly, and it'll just take down all the scaffolding or whatever, and that'll be that. And could this be a sign of a change from the New York Times and from the left on the trans child issue?
Well, yeah, I think it certainly is a sign of the ground shifting, because the New York Times is the holy see of the woke church. So if it's now allowing, freedom of thought on this particular issue and not dictating how people are supposed to think about it, then that is a hugely significant shift. But it probably doesn't yet signal a pivot away from wokery-pokery in general. I think it may be that the woke have finally woken up to the fact that they've overreached in when it comes to trans stuff, that insisting that biological men who identify as women have no advantage over biological women when competing against them in sports like rugby and tennis and football. They've realized that, most ordinary people who aren't completely kind of pickled in this nonsense can see straight through that and realize that it's nonsense. So I think it represents a slight retreat, but I think it's a tactical retreat. I don't think it represents any kind of surrender.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it is a slight retreat, much like the diversity and inclusion nonsense that's getting ousted gradually as well. So keep your eyes peeled on that. That is pretty much all our free content this week. And we've done loads again, too much really for the free people, but there it is. We're very generous. And I didn't feel we could take peak woke away. I felt bad about that. So I've given you peak woke, everyone. Enjoy it. There it is. And once again, live show, February 12th, Hippodrome, Leicester Square in London, Monday, February 12th. Starts. What time does it start, Toby? 6:30.
It starts. Doors open 6:30. Show curtain goes up at 7. Curtain goes down at 9.
Basedmedia.org. Go to events or go to eventbrite.com. If you want to support me, go to buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon. People are obviously paying for Based instead, which I understand. But if you specifically don't like Toby, you could go to buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon. There's the current thing. My other podcast still doing very well. We've had some great episodes lately. Just released a very, very interesting one with a guy who knew Andrew Tate before he was famous, John Sonmez, very interesting guy. What else? My Substack, nickdixon.substack.com. I'm writing a lot more there. I think that is it. And then mainly, of course, go to basedmedia.org, where we're about to go for the paid content. But Toby, what else do you want to add?
Yeah, we've got about another 20 to 30 minutes now of premium content, which if you want to access, you're going to have to become a premium subscriber. Go to basemedia.org, click on sign up, but you can become a premium subscriber for as little as £5 a month. And not only will you be able to access the premium content in this show, but we're going to put other shows on the site shortly. And you'll also be able to access the premium content in those shows. If you support the work of the Free Speech Union, helping people like Lindsay fight back against the bullies, then go to freespeechunion.org patreon.com/join if you're not already a member. You can also donate on that page. And if you enjoy the content we produce at the Daily Sceptic, go to Daily Sceptic. For as little as £5 a month, you can become a commentator and comment below the line. And to do that, go to dailyskeptic.org and click on donate and help us produce the fantastic content that we produce every day.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all the non-based listeners and the based listeners who are about to get the extra content where we get sexist and it just gets horrendous in the paid bit. We can't release that for free, obviously. We say our real views. That's in the paid content section. But anyway, go over to basemedia.org. That's where we're going to go now. Thanks to all the free people. I think that is it. So until next week, stay skeptical.
Stay skeptical.